The Ashford Global boardroom was a sterile cathedral of glass and steel, dominated by the low, rhythmic hum of powerful servers. Kai Jensen, 30, and driven by idealistic energeta, lost his voice as the heavy doors glided open. Sloane Ashford, 35, and flawless in a perfect crimson suit, paused on the threshold, command radiating from her. She crossed the silent room, her counsel placing a stack of legal papers into Kai's stunned hand. Your company, Jensen Innovations, is terminated. Your algorithm is mine, Sloane dictated, her voice low and devastatingly loud. Sign now, Mr. Jensen, or I'd take it all for free. The clinical contempt in her pale gray eyes instantly ignited Kai's fury. He crushed the papers, the sound sharp in the silence. You just acquired an enemy, he bit out. Sloane didn't flinch, turning to sweep out and leaving him alone with the cold, constant sound of the surging servers. Episode 1. The Acquisition of War. The air in the boardroom of Ashford Global was the color of steel and ambition. 32 stories above the city, Sloane Ashford surveyed her kingdom, a woman sculpted by wealth and discipline. At 35, she had turned her family's legacy conglomerate into a fortress. But her magnetic presence masked a deep, surgical detachment. Her pale gray eyes, often mistaken for indifference, were purely analytical and currently fixed on the target of her latest acquisition. Jensen Innovations is refusing the final offer, Miss Ashford, reported her COO, his voice tight. The founder, Kai Jensen, is holding out citing ethical concerns regarding the implementation of his software. Sloane gave a faint, chilling smile. Ethical concerns are just a euphemism for inadequate funding. Jensen built the best sustainable energy algorithm in the world. He's idealistic. I am inevitable. Kai Jensen, at 30, was everything Sloane was not, built on passion, driven by principle, and accustomed to fighting for what was right. His small, fiercely dedicated team had poured 5 years into their proprietary software, a clean energy management system intended for public good. That afternoon, Kai was giving his final presentation to a major public utilities commission. He needed this contract to keep Ashford Global's vultures at bay. He was halfway through his pitch, selling his vision of a cleaner future, when the boardroom doors burst open. Sloane Ashford walked in, flanked by security and counsel. She didn't apologize for the interruption. She simply commanded attention. She carried a single, slim tablet. Mr. Jensen, I apologize for the dramatics, but since you refused to answer my calls, I felt compelled to deliver this in person. She nodded to her counsel, who handed Kai a thick stack of legal documents. Ashford Global has just secured controlling interest in your primary investor, Greencore Holdings. As of this moment, Greencore is terminating its contract with Jensen Innovations, effective immediately. And, as of 45 minutes ago, we have acquired the patent rights to your baseline algorithm, which was used as collateral against the Greencore loan. Kai felt the floor drop out from under him. His life's work, his company, his future, all legally, surgically, and publicly stolen. You can't do this, Kai whispered, his voice rough with disbelief. Sloane stepped closer, invading his space, her eyes holding his in a close-up of icy contempt. I just did, Mr. Jensen. You can't build a profitable future on idealism alone. It's messy, unstable, and ultimately weak. My offer still stands. Sign the final acquisition papers. We will pay you enough to settle your debts and walk away. Or I will bury you in litigation and take it all for free. Kai's shock curdled into pure, incandescent rage. You call yourself a business leader? You're a corporate parasite. You didn't just buy my algorithm, Miss Ashford. You just acquired an enemy. Sloane's smile tightened, a spark of something almost interested flashing in her eyes. Good. Enemies are predictable. I look forward to your inevitable surrender." She turned, her power a physical thing, and swept out, leaving Kai stranded in the wreckage of his public humiliation. But the confrontation was not over. 2 days later, a mandate from the state's regulatory body, desperate to stabilize the suddenly fragile energy sector, arrived at both their desks. Ashford Global had bought the patent, but Kai's specialized team held the indispensable expertise to deploy it. The mandate was, due to the critical nature of the technology, Ashford Global must immediately establish a joint venture, Ashford-Jensen Synergy, with Kai Jensen acting as the mandatory systems integrator for a period no less than 18 months. His termination would require a full governmental review. Sloane slammed the paper down on her desk. She had won the war, only to be trapped with the one man who saw past her wealth to the brutal truth of her methods. Kai, meanwhile, saw 18 months of torture, but also 18 months of proximity, giving him time to discover the fault line in Sloane's fortress. Episode 2. The Hostile Office. Kai's new office was a single glass cube planted squarely in the middle of the Ashford Global executive floor, visible, exposed, and humiliatingly small. Sloane's first official meeting with Kai was tense enough to crack the glass. "Let's establish the terms of this mandatory partnership, Mr. Jensen," Sloane dictated, standing over his desk. She wore a perfectly tailored crimson suit, the color a brazen challenge. "You will report to me. Your team reports to my department heads. You will deliver daily metrics, and you will not, under any circumstances, discuss the acquisition with any employee. We are unified publicly." Kai leaned back, his gaze steady, refusing to shrink. "And my terms, Ms. Ashford? Since you acquired me through force, I get to use that force to protect my people. Every member of my former team gets a 5-year, guaranteed contract with full severance should you fail to utilize their expertise. And my new title grants me full access to all data pertaining to this project, including the true valuation you used to fleece my investors." Sloane bristled, leaning down, their faces inches apart. The air was electric, thick with antagonism and the dangerous spark of attraction. "You are testing me, Mr. Jensen." "I'm ensuring I don't become collateral damage again, Ms. Ashford," Kai countered, his voice a low, steady rumble. "I know what you value, the bottom line. If you can't keep your best talent happy, the bottom line suffers. You may own the code, but I still own the mind that wrote it." Sloane held his gaze for a long, fraught moment, a tiny, reluctant surge of admiration cutting through her anger. He was brilliant, and he was fearless. "Done," she clipped, stepping back. The cold mask was back in place. "But every misstep you make, every delay, every failure will be reflected in your quarterly review. I will not fail because of your idealism." The following weeks were an executive war of attrition. Their conversations were rapid fire, intellectual sparring matches, fought over data and deliverables. Sloane would tear apart his projected timelines, Kai would find flaws in her supply chain. Their dialogue was sharp, hostile, and strangely thrilling. One late evening, Kai was struggling to debug a particularly complex integration issue. Sloane walked past his glass cube, intending to leave, but paused. She saw the lines of fatigue around his eyes, the frustrated tap of his fingers on the keyboard. She didn't offer help. Instead, she leaned against the glass and simply said, "Look at the secondary query path. You're missing a cascade failsafe in the third module." Kai looked up, startled. "How do you know that?" "I read everything," Sloane replied, pulling up a chair uninvited. She didn't look at him, staring instead at the screen. "My father used to say, You can't control what you don't understand. I understand everything under this roof. Show me the code. For the next hour, they sat side by side, their elbows occasionally brushing, solving the complex problem. They argued, not about business ethics, but about coding logic. Kai was stunned by her razor-sharp technical insight. Sloane was surprised by the smooth, unspoken synergy of their minds. When the bug was finally crushed, a small, shared victory, Kai looked at her. "Thank you, Sloane." The use of her first name caused a visible jolt. She stood instantly, pushing the chair back. The cold mask was back in place. "Don't mistake professional courtesy for intimacy, Mr. Jensen," she warned, her voice glacial. "Get some rest. We start the deployment phase tomorrow." But as she walked away, Kai noticed the slightest tremor in her hand as she adjusted her sleeve, a crack in the fortress revealing a human reaction beneath the armor. Episode 3. The Weight of Control. The deployment phase was grueling, involving multiple remote sites and mandatory conference calls at 3 a.m. The pressure was enormous, and Sloane insisted on handling all media scrutiny personally, refusing to allow Kai any public visibility. Kai knew this wasn't about protecting the brand. It was about protecting her personal narrative of absolute control. Their first late-night on-site inspection took them to a remote wind farm installation. It was cold, dark, and utterly silent save for the massive, sweeping rotors overhead. Sloane arrived in a black SUV wearing a heavy, expensive trench coat, looking utterly out of place. "The weather reports predict snow within the hour," Sloane announced, checking her phone. "We need to finalize the network diagnostics and leave." "If we leave now, the diagnostics will be inconclusive," Kai argued, pointing to a flickering monitor displaying raw data. "The cold stress test is essential. We need 40 more minutes." "We leave now," Sloane insisted, her voice tight. "My schedule does not permit delays." "Your schedule or your comfort?" Kai challenged, crossing his arms. "You demanded total control of this project, Sloane. That means facing the reality of the work, not dictating the weather. I need those 40 minutes, or this entire system fails at the first freeze." Sloane glared at him, the wind whipping her hair across her face. The high-powered lights of the turbines illuminated the pure fury in her eyes. "You're deliberately pushing me, Jensen." "Yes, you thrive on pressure, so I'm giving you pressure," Kai stated simply. "Are you here to run a clean energy company, or are you just here to manage your image?" Sloane was defeated by his logic, and perhaps by his sheer refusal to be intimidated. She pulled her coat tighter. 30 minutes, then we leave. I'll wait in the maintenance shed." The maintenance shed was small and poorly heated. Sloane sat on an overturned bucket, looking utterly miserable. Kai finished his work and came in, rubbing his hands together. "Finished. The data looks clean." "Good," she replied, not looking up. Kai noticed she was trembling slightly, not just from the cold. He pulled a spare wool blanket from a storage shelf, one his old team used, and tossed it to her. Sloane looked at the simple blanket as if it were a tactical weapon. "I don't need charity, Jensen." "It's not charity, it's pragmatism," Kai shrugged. "You're shivering. Hypothermia is bad for control. Just take the damn blanket, Sloane." She hesitated, then slowly wrapped it around her shoulders. She looked small, tucked into the thick wool, the veneer of invincible CEO finally cracking. "Why the relentless control, Sloane?" Kai asked, his voice softer, taking a seat opposite her. "The wealth, the power, the ruthlessness, it's all a reaction. What are you guarding against?" Sloane looked up, her expression a mix of shock and icy pain. "You know nothing about me." "I know you see vulnerability as a fatal weakness." And I know that's not something you learn in business school. That's something you learn the hard way. Before Sloane could respond, the power to the shed cut out, plunging them into absolute darkness. Sloane immediately sucked in a sharp, panicked breath. Her composure vanished, replaced by an audible, primal fear. Kai heard her ragged breathing. "Sloane? What's wrong? It's just the generator." "Get the door open," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "Now! I need the light." Kai fumbled for his phone, turning on the flashlight. The narrow beam caught Sloane huddled against the wall, her eyes wide, her entire body rigid with terror. I I can't be in the dark," she stammered, pulling the blanket around her head. "Get me out of here, now." Kai realized this was her secret, her fault line, the absolute fear of darkness, of being trapped, of losing control. He didn't ask questions. He didn't touch her. He just opened the door, letting the faint moonlight flood the tiny space. "We're outside, Sloane," he said softly as he stood beside her as she gasped for air. "I'm here. You're safe." In that moment, she was just a woman, terrified and stripped of her power, and Kai knew his war had shifted from professional to devastatingly personal. Episode 4, Fire and Ice. The secret created an explosive new dynamic. Sloane was humiliated that Kai knew her weakness, and her attempts to regain control translated into increased aggression at the office. "Your deployment schedule is too lax, Jensen," she snapped during a board meeting, tearing into his timeline. "I want to accelerate the Phase 2 rollout by 3 weeks." "That's impossible without compromising structural integrity," Kai shot back, standing his ground. "You're risking a system-wide failure just to hit an arbitrary deadline." "I don't deal in arbitrary, Mr. Jensen. I deal in results," Sloane countered, walking toward him, her crimson suit a blur of energy. Their verbal fight escalated until their voices dropped to harsh, intimate whispers, the boardroom tension palpable. "You think because you saw a moment of weakness, you have leverage," Sloane challenged, her eyes glittering. "I still own your future. You belong to me for 18 months. "I belong to no one, Sloane," he breathed, leaning down until their foreheads almost touched. "And I saw more than weakness. I saw the fear that drives the control. And I saw the person underneath. That person is a far more worthy opponent than the corporate facade." The proximity, the anger, the unspoken acknowledgement of the kiss they both wanted, it was unbearable. "Get out," Sloane said, her voice shaking. "Get out of my office, Jensen, or I swear I'll fire every last one of your team members on a technicality." Kai didn't move. He simply held her gaze, his dark eyes challenging her. "You won't, because you need us to maintain control of the system. You're trapped, Sloane, not by me, by your own relentless need for perfection." He finally stepped back and left the room, leaving her alone with the smoldering ruins of her composure. Later that week, a professional gala forced them into their first public appearance as partners. Sloane, dressed in a sleek midnight blue gown, looked like she was carved from ice. Untouchable, ethereal, terrifyingly beautiful. Kai, in a sharp tuxedo, walked to her side. "Remember the terms of this engagement, Mr. Jensen," Sloane murmured, accepting his arm with a stiffness that was purely for show. "We are united. We are flawless. No emotion, no familiarity." "As you wish, Miss Ashford," Kai replied, leaning close enough for her to feel his breath on her ear. "But I can't promise the flawless part. When you look like that, the air tends to crackle." Sloane felt a blush creep up her neck, a purely human response she hadn't experienced in years. She tightened her grip on his arm. "Control yourself," she whispered. perfectly controlled, Sloane. It's you I'm worried about." The evening was a performance. They navigated the room, their movements synchronized, their smiles practiced. Every interaction was a lie, a carefully choreographed dance of respect and power. But beneath the polite veneer, their hands tightened on each other's arm, their proximity a devastating collision of wills. As the night wore on, the alcohol loosened the corporate tongues around them. Kai overheard a conversation between two rival board members about Sloane's father, the late CEO. Old man Ashford tried to force her into a contract marriage with the Sinclair boy years ago to save the stock. She fought him tooth and nail, had to sacrifice everything, including her engagement to that musician. What was his name? Elias? Whatever it was, she crushed that whole side of her life to take control of the company. Kai looked at Sloane, who was currently laughing politely with a donor, the image of ice-cold grace. The ruthless ambition wasn't just about money. It was about escaping a fate designed for her by a controlling family, a lifetime of fighting for her own autonomy. He suddenly saw the cost of her control, the sacrifice, the heartbreak, the years spent building an impenetrable wall against the world. He realized she hadn't just acquired his company. She had taken on the entire burden of her family's legacy. Episode 5: The Venice Pact. The next phase of the project required a mandatory trip to Venice, Italy, for an international energy summit. For 3 days, they would be utterly isolated from their usual defenses. In Venice, the drama of their conflict was heightened by the backdrop of ancient stone and shimmering water. They were booked into a single, luxurious executive suite, a forced arrangement for security and efficiency. "There is one bedroom, Sloane," Kai observed, standing in the opulent suite. Sloane, surprisingly, didn't panic. Her face was set. "I'll take the couch. My sleep routine is non-negotiable. Don't push it, Jensen." That night, Kai found her asleep on the sofa, still wearing a silk nightgown, her body rigid and uneasy. He remembered her terror in the dark shed. He quietly grabbed the blanket he'd tossed to her on the wind farm and gently laid it over her. The next morning, the summit was a disaster. A rival corporation publicly unveiled a competing algorithm, cheaper and faster to implement than Kai's, threatening to make their entire 18-month project obsolete before it even started. In their suite, Sloane was radiating fury, pacing like a caged animal. "This is what happens when you compromise," she bit out. "This is what happens when you rely on idealism instead of brute force. You lose everything." "We haven't lost yet," Kai argued, trying to be the calm center of her storm. "Their system is cheaper because it cuts corners on security and sustainability. We can expose that." "We don't have time for a smear campaign, Kai," she snapped, using his first name without thinking. She ran a hand through her hair, her panic leaking through her control. "My entire portfolio is exposed to this integration. My father's board members are waiting for me to fail. If I fail, they take the company and they sell off everything I fought for." "Your father's legacy is what you're afraid of losing?" Kai pressed gently. "Not the money. The name." "The name is everything!" Sloane exploded, tears of sheer frustration welling in her eyes, instantly dried by her ferocity. "I spent 10 years fixing his mistakes, fighting off the sharks he invited to the table. If I lose control, they erase me." Kai stepped toward her, his professional facade dissolving. "I know what it feels like to lose everything to a vulture, Sloane. I can help you fight them. But you have to trust me, not just with the code, but with the fight itself. Stop fighting me and start fighting with me." He reached out, his hand gently cupping her face, forcing her to look at him. She was breathing hard, her vulnerability stark and painful. "It's a new partnership, Sloane," he murmured, his voice thick with unspent tension. "A pact. Me and you. Against the world." She looked into his eyes, the deep brown sincerity of them, and saw not an enemy, but a refuge. She leaned into his touch, a silent surrender. "What's the strategy?" she finally whispered, her control returning, but softer now, shared. "We expose the weakness in their algorithm," Kai stated, his voice firm, "but we have to do it tonight, and we have to use the only thing they won't expect: truth."
Episode 6. The Price of the Name. The strategy required them to hack into the rival's database, legally and ethically, to expose the flaws in their coding that endangered public safety. Kai knew how to do it. Sloane knew how to frame the exposure for maximum public pressure. They spent the entire night in the hotel suite. Two people united by a shared purpose, fighting side by side against a common enemy. The forced intimacy was now a choice. They worked in tandem, their mental processes perfectly aligned, the tension between them building with every shared whisper and accidental touch. As dawn approached, they had what they needed: irrefutable proof of a cascade failure risk in the rival's cheap algorithm. "We did it," Kai said, leaning back, exhausted but exhilarated. Sloane was staring at the data, but her mind was elsewhere. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a worn, sealed envelope. "There's something you need to know, Kai," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "This partnership, it was never 18 months. It was always 30 days. Kai stared at her, the sudden coldness of betrayal. "What are you talking about?" "The initial acquisition papers, the ones I humiliated you with," Sloane said, her eyes unable to meet his. "They included a 90-day review clause with the government, which I activated after the mandate came down. If I could prove your system was either fully redundant or financially non-viable within that window, the mandate would be void. I would take the patent, and you would be terminated. Tomorrow is the 30th day." Kai felt the devastating return of the shock he'd felt in the boardroom. "You mean this whole time? The fight, the partnership, the trauma? It was a countdown to my execution?" "It was the only way to save my company," Sloane insisted, her voice breaking. "I didn't expect to trust you, to need you. I couldn't tell you, or you would have walked away, and I would have lost everything." "You didn't just lie, Sloane," Kai said, his voice quiet, deadly. "You engineered a relationship under false pretenses. You forced me to fight for the very thing you planned to steal again. I gave you my vulnerability, and you handed me a termination notice." Sloane stood, tears finally spilling over, but she refused to wipe them away. "I am giving you the choice now, Kai. You can submit the evidence we found. It will save the system, save my company, and prove the worth of the algorithm. But it means you keep your job, you keep your team, you stay." "And what if I don't want your job?" Kai challenged, his heart a raw, aching wound. "What if I simply expose the rival, walk away, and leave you to fend for yourself?" Sloane looked at him, defeated. "Then you walk away clean, Kai, and I lose the company I sacrificed my life for. That is the price of the name. It's what I pay for control." She turned away, walking toward the terrace doors, the rising Venetian sun illuminating the profound misery on her face. Kai watched her go, torn between the devastating need for self-preservation and the agonizing knowledge of her pain. Episode 7. Reckless Abandon. Kai didn't walk away. Not yet. He submitted the data, exposing the rival's fatal flaw, just hours before the review deadline. Sloane's company was saved, the stock stabilized, and the Ashford-Jensen synergy was secured. Kai had chosen the greater good, but he hadn't forgiven her. He kept his distance, professional and cold, while Sloane tried desperately to mend the rift. She was the one chasing him now, not for business, but for absolution. One weekend, Kai impulsively decided to attend a local charity event. Sloane was there, a last-minute attendee, looking miserable but obligated. Kai watched her from across the ballroom, a solitary, beautiful figure battling 100 ghosts. She saw him and walked straight over, determined.
I know what I did was unforgivable, Kai, she said, her voice low. It was effective, Kai corrected, not meeting his eyes. And it was exactly what I should have expected from the inevitable Sloane Ashford. Don't push me away like this, she pleaded. Everything I did, the ruthlessness, the planning, it was all to protect the one thing I couldn't risk losing. And then I met you, and the whole plan became irrelevant. And yet you executed it anyway, Kai finished, finally looking at her, his hurt clear. That's the difference between us, Sloane. You chose control over trust. You chose the name over the man. Before she could argue, a sudden commotion erupted. A well-dressed man, clearly drunk, staggered toward Sloane, his face twisted in fury. "You destroyed my father, Sloane," the man shouted, lunging at her. "You think you can just buy up people's lives and walk away clean?" Security was slow to react. The man lunged, throwing a glass of wine at her. It missed, shattering against the wall, but the intent was clear. Violence. Sloane froze, her old trauma, the loss of control, the public humiliation, paralyzing her. In a split second, Kai acted. He grabbed Sloane, pulling her behind him, shielding her with his body from the drunk's subsequent lunge. He kept her pinned against his chest until security finally intervened. The room dissolved in shocked whispers. Kai held Sloane, her body shaking against his. "Sloane, are you okay?" he murmured, his hands tight on her shoulders. She looked up at him, her face pale. You didn't have to do that, Kai. You didn't have to protect me." "That's the difference between us, Sloane," he repeated, his voice filled with a fierce tenderness that transcended their anger. "I don't choose control over trust. I choose you. Every time." He kissed her then, not with the angry desperation of their first kiss, but with a profound, undeniable tenderness. It was a kiss of protection, forgiveness, and absolute surrender. Episode 8. The Midnight Strategy. The incident at the charity event created a massive public buzz. It also forced Sloane to confront the reality of the enemies her ruthless ambition had created. Not just business rivals, but deeply wounded families. Sloane was in seclusion, trying to manage the PR disaster, when Kai showed up at her penthouse door late that night. "You can't hide up here, Sloane," Kai said, stepping into the minimalist, cold apartment. "I can't face them, Kai," she confessed, walking to the edge of her skyscraper balcony, looking out over the indifferent city. "That man was right. I ruined his father. I was ruthless because I believed if I wasn't, I would be ruined myself. I was so focused on being unbreakable, I broke everything around me." Kai joined her on the balcony, leaning against the cold railing. "Then let me help you fix the broken things, including the ones inside this apartment." Kai spent the night with her, not as a lover, but as a silent, steady anchor. He helped her draft a new kind of public statement. Not a denial, but a pledge. A pledge to shift the focus of Ashford Global entirely toward responsible, ethical mergers and community reinvestment. "If I do this, Kai, the board will revolt. They'll see it as weakness. They'll try to force the vote and strip me of control." "Let them try," Kai stated, his hand finding hers on the railing. "You have a strategy now. You have the truth. And you have me." He looked into her eyes, the blue-gray of them no longer icy, but molten with fear and hope. "The incident, the one where I protected you, it gave us an image. You need to leverage it. You need a public face who believes in the company's new ethical direction. You need a partner." "Are you offering to be my shield?" Sloane asked, a faint, wry smile touching her lips. "I'm offering to be your co-architect. You command the power, I command the integrity. We fight the board together, but this time we fight cleanly, honestly, and for something bigger than ourselves." Sloane looked out at the city she had always ruled alone. Now, for the first time, the idea of sharing that power with Kai, with his vision, felt like freedom, not failure. If we fail, Kai, you lose everything again, she warned. If we fail together, and I'd rather lose everything with you than win the whole world without you. Episode 9. The Public Confession. The emergency board meeting was set for a Friday. The vultures had circled, armed with proxies and eager to vote Sloane out, citing reckless disregard for shareholder value. Sloane and Kai walked in together, a united front that surprised and unnerved the board. Sloane took her seat, looking regal and calm. Kai sat beside her, not as an employee, but as an advisor. The proceedings began, brutal and swift. The lead dissident, Mr. Sterling, presented his case, detailing every aggressive acquisition, every hostile maneuver, culminating in the recent public scandals. Sloane Ashford has proven she is unfit to lead, Sterling concluded. Her focus on personal gain and brutal control has made Ashford Global a financial liability and a PR disaster. I motion for her immediate removal. Sloane waited for the motion to be seconded, then arose. The entire room held its breath. Mr. Sterling is correct, Sloane began, her voice ringing clear and steady. My leadership has been defined by brutal control. I used power to take, to dominate, to remove any possible threat. I crushed companies, I humiliated people, and I lived in a constant state of defense, terrified that if I paused for 1 second, everything would be stripped away. The room was silent, stunned by her admission. That fear was born of a painful, private past that I allowed to dictate my business ethics. I believed the only way to escape being controlled was to control everyone else. Then I met Kai Jensen, she stated, her voice full of a raw, undeniable emotion. I took his company, I betrayed him twice. I tried to reduce him to a metric on a spreadsheet, and he refused to break. Kai watched her, his heart swelling with a fierce pride. He didn't fight my power, he challenged my character, Sloane confessed. He showed me that true strength isn't found in domination, but in transparency, integrity, and building something together. He risked his entire professional life to save my company, even after I had lied to him. He chose the right thing even when I offered him the easy escape. Sloane paused, taking a deep breath, the grandest gesture of vulnerability she had ever allowed herself. I'm not asking for your vote. I am making a public declaration. Effective immediately, I am restructuring Ashford Global into a socially responsible partnership. And I am appointing Kai Jensen as the company's first chief ethics officer and co-director of all strategic development. Sterling scoffed. You are promoting the man whose company you stole? That's lunacy. It is not lunacy, Mr. Sterling, Sloane said, her eyes flashing with a new, powerful kind of steel, one forged not by coldness, but by love. It is the only way to correct the mistakes of the past and build a viable future. I need his integrity to temper my ambition. I need his belief to challenge my fear. And I need his honesty to anchor my life. She turned to Kai, extending her hand. It was the boldest public declaration possible, a surrender of absolute power and the ultimate public confession of her love and trust. Kai, I need you to build this new legacy with me, she said, her voice clear. Will you be my partner? Kai took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. He looked at the shocked board members, then back at the woman who had crushed him, and then opened her heart to him. I will, Sloane, he said, his voice husky with love. On one condition. No more secrets. Ever. Never again. Episode 10. The Unbreakable Design. 2 years later, Ashford Jensen Global was not only thriving, but had become a pioneering model for ethical, profitable business. Kai and Sloane worked side by side, their offices now merged into one seamless open space overlooking the city. The old Ashford Global fortress had been dismantled, replaced by a true partnership, a synergy built on mutual respect and shared goals. Sloane's cold exterior had softened, replaced with a confident warmth. She still wielded immense power, but she did so with grace and consideration, Kai's principles acting as her internal compass. Kai walked into the office one afternoon to find Sloane staring out the window, a thoughtful, small smile on her face. "Thinking about the market?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "No," she murmured, leaning back against him. "I was thinking about the first time you called me a parasite in that courtroom, and how right you were." "You were a parasite, but you were also a victim of a system designed to control you," Kai corrected, kissing her neck. "And I learned that underneath the ruthless CEO was a woman whose fear was bigger than her bank account. That's why I stayed." Sloane turned, placing her hands on his chest, her eyes shimmering with genuine, unguarded love. "I never would have survived the board revolt without you, Kai. You didn't just save my company, you saved my life. You forced me to become the leader I was supposed to be." "We built something better, didn't we? Something unbreakable." He led her to a large framed architectural blueprint hanging on the wall, the only non-corporate decoration in the room. It was the initial sketch for their very first ethical acquisition project, a community-focused solar farm. "The design is finished, the investment is secure, and the community engagement is approved. Next week, we break ground." Sloane looked at the blueprint, then at Kai. Her eyes held a spark of the old ambition, but it was now entirely focused on creation, not acquisition. "Let's go break some ground, Mr. Jensen," she said, her voice low and full of promise. Kai reached into his desk and pulled out a small, velvet box. He opened it, bringing out a platinum ring. "I've waited long enough for you to ask, so I'm gonna skip the formalities. Will you make this partnership permanent, Sloane? Will you marry me and help me build the rest of my life?" Sloane laughed, the pure joy of it filling the steel and glass room. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Kai. We have a lot of broken things left to fix, together." He pulled her into a fierce kiss, a true partnership built on fire, forgiveness, and the undeniable, beautiful synergy of two souls who started as enemies and found their greatest strength in surrender. They were the perfect, unbreakable design.